Hey everybody, Rich Munroe here with BNB Investing Group. Thanks for jumping on this week. As a reminder, BNB Investing Group works with real estate investors and realtors to explore the short-term rental model. And we typically look at whether you're doing acquisitions, whether you're going to do rental arbitrage, or whether you're managing other properties for other owners or for investors. And the BNB investing program is looking for folks that are ready to take action, want to grow a scalable short-term rental business. And so if you have an interest in that and you are currently pivoting in your real estate game and kind of getting into the short-term rental world, I would love to have a quick 10-minute chat with you. You can reach out to me with direct messenger, and we can have a quick chat and see if BNB investing program is a fit for you. So what I'd like to do today is we're going to do a overview of kind of the elephant in the room. Most people that are doing short-term rentals and already hosting properties, no matter where they are actually in the world, understand the nuances of short-term rental regulations. It's kind of a moving target. Even though Airbnb has been around for close to 13 or 14 years, there are still a lot of cities and counties that have not specifically addressed ordinances and rules as it applies to the short-term rental model. Now, they typically define short-term rental as anything that's rented for less than 30 days. And so if you're obviously doing midterm rentals, 3 or 4 months or 6 months, or obviously if you're doing long-term rentals like 12-month leases, those don't apply. And so most jurisdictions will define it as anything that's less than 30 days for your rental. And so let's just dive right in. We've looked at across the United States actually, and most of the major cities, unfortunately, kind of adopt the same type of regulations and rules, typically around the fact that you are able to do short-term rentals, or if you are able to do so, you're able to do it with hosting somebody out of your primary residence. The whole way that Airbnb got started was basically a company based in San Francisco. 3 college kids recognized that there was a large conference in town, and so they rented out their couch. And also brought in a blow-up mattress. And really the first few guests of Airbnb were just that. They came in and they rented a room, they rented a couch, and they rented a blow-up mattress. And so most of what Airbnb, kind of the DNA and how they got started, is around this home sharing concept. And so unfortunately, what tends to happen when they develop rules and regulations, obviously, San Francisco is their home base. You can't do short-term rentals as an investor in San Francisco. The same goes for Las Vegas, Los Angeles, and then on the East Coast, New York, Philadelphia, in the Midwest, Chicago, and then down the East Coast, Atlanta and Miami as well. And so it's not only just in the United States. There are the same kind of rules that end up getting typically set across the world. And so whether you're in Paris or Berlin or London, they're all facing the same issues. And so, they've kind of over the years done an analysis on how strict the regulations are based on the location and based on the city. And that's kind of what this chart is displaying here. In a lot of cases, you've got, very strict regulations. Same thing here with these other locations: Paris, Amsterdam, Barcelona, New York, and Berlin. And, quite literally, this is, like I mentioned, a moving target. And so, just today, there was news from New York City about hampering down on short-term rentals again. They've already had regulations in place in New York for quite some time. And they've got a recent change that they're going to be basically shutting down a lot of Airbnb listings. And unfortunately, when this happens, Airbnb does tend to try to work with hosts. However, Airbnb is kind of a volume-driven entity. And so their main purpose is kind of driving more and more hosts onto the platform that are able to do it out of their homes. They're less concerned about folks that have multiple listings, and so they typically gravitate towards that when it comes to rulemaking. For those of you that are jumping on, if you wouldn't mind just confirming for me that the audio is coming across clear and you can hear me, and that you can see the screen. Also, just shoot out there for me kind of where you're based. I know we have a lot of members that are here in the Atlanta area and also in Florida. But if you wouldn't mind just throwing in comments for us kind of where you're based. I'd love to take some questions on this topic. Short-term rental regulations is really the first step when you are looking at figuring out what target market you want to go into. And so definitely, this is really, as an investor, and if you're starting out with short-term rentals, this is kind of where you're going to start. And so I wanted to kind of provide everybody with an overview of what the environment's like, what it looks like in different locations, and then also some resources on how to understand these regulations, because a lot of times they're not crystal clear. And so part of what typically starts the pattern here in most of the major cities as to why these regulations end up coming to be, typically a lot of the city council members tend to lean on the affordable housing argument, that there's a lack of affordable housing. That's why they want to limit or do away with short-term rentals. And in a lot of cases, that's not true, because as a lot of you know, affordable housing compared to some of the short-term rentals that are in most cities are not necessarily the same type of property. And so there's been some studies that we've done that we've been able to get some statistical data that kind of shows that the housing market is not directly impacted by the short-term rental space. And so that is something that we use when we're meeting with legislators to try to explain to them that's the case. Now, the next item on here, ensure quality of life of residents. So usually, most of the time, 80 to 90% of the time, the first time that legislators start hearing about short-term rentals in their districts is when you have neighbors that are complaining about, unruly hosts. So hosts that are doing short-term rentals in their neighborhood that aren't necessarily being respectful and are not adhering to the noise compliance, as well as parking and garbage and things of that nature. And so, unfortunately, what happens is when you have those few bad apples that are hosting short-term rentals that aren't doing what they should, basically those residents are going to go complain to their council people and the folks that are on planning in the county. And when that happens, they typically will have their monthly hearings, and that's really the beginnings that starts for the short-term rental ordinance rules that get them put in place. And so, unfortunately, the first time they get educated on what this is through that experience of folks that are complaining about it. And so that's why it's ultra important in your local area to be aware of what's happening in your departments, in the counties and the cities or surrounding where you're going to be investing in real estate, to make sure that you're aware of when these hearings are occurring and be able to participate in them so that you can kind of share the other side of things other than folks that are complaining. Ensure guest safety. Now, there's been a lot of bad press over the last several years on folks that are throwing wild parties in Airbnbs, as well as, drive-by shootings, things of that nature. The reality is a lot of those incidents occur just in general in all properties. And unfortunately, when it happens in an Airbnb, it gets an extra spotlight that gets put on it. And then you typically get that as the end result. It's basically kind of the horror story of what happened. There are some things that we do as hosts to mitigate that risk. A lot of professional investors that are doing this full time and have multiple listings like we do, we basically will not go live on a listing until we have met each of the neighbors, made sure they have our contact information. Don't wait to meet your neighbors when something extreme happens, as well as basically making sure that the house rules are in place. We actually have a guest portal for all of our guests. It doesn't matter if they're coming through Airbnb or other travel platforms. We want to verify, most importantly, kind of their age, because that's usually where you're going to have a lot of the unruly incidents are for folks that are younger and coming in and throwing parties and really doing things they shouldn't be doing. And so we actually require each guest to upload a copy of their ID. And in some cases, we will require a selfie to confirm their identity. And in most of our listings, we don't allow guests that are under the age of 25 to stay at that listing unless there's some specific things that we can validate, whether it's a college student. During COVID, we had a lot of college kids that got displaced. And so we were able to a lot of us were able to house college kids during that time. So there are some exceptions to it, but that also mitigates your risk with fraud. And so most of the real bad situations that occur with short-term rentals are when you have somebody that's used a stolen identity to set the booking and the reservation up, and essentially come in without caring what the consequences are. And so by doing some additional vetting at your listing, this will limit that risk and kind of, make sure that you have limited incidents. The other thing that we do, we tell folks on the regulatory side, we use noise detection devices. And so this will measure the level of sound. And again, in our house rules, we make it very clear. There should not be any noise after 10 p.m. or before 8 a.m. in the morning, not to disturb the neighbors. And so we have a team that basically monitors that measurement. And if it goes over a certain decibel number during those hours, we'll reach out to the guest. Let's say it's 12:30 at night and we get a loud music playing consistently or a crowded room. We reach out to them and confirm that everything's okay. And again, we're doing this proactively to avoid having to get the neighbors kind of reach out and complain about it. And so that is typically what we end up doing to help kind of minimize. We've hosted thousands and thousands of guests, and we have very limited incidents that are all these horror stories that you hear about in the news and through some of the neighborhood complaints. So this is just a few examples of what these regulations are talking about. So for New York, even though they're about to make some changes to it now, this is something that's been in place since May of 2011. And you're not allowed to basically rent your entire home out. You have to be present while you have the guests staying there. And you have to do, obviously, collect sales tax and hotel tax, which is kind of consistent across the board. San Francisco, very similar. Host must be present. You can't rent out the entire apartment. Los Angeles, you have to obtain a business license. Now you must be your primary residence. And so you can only do your primary residence as a short-term rental legally, and you can only do it for 120 days per year. There are fines that are associated with it, and then occupancy taxes. And so if you're noticing the common theme here, Washington, D.C., same thing, obtain business license, must be primary resident. 90 days per year is kind of the limit. And then you have similar fine violations if it occurs. Chicago actually has the ability to obtain a license for multiple units. However, they still have a limitation on how many units you can do in a multi-unit building. So in Chicago, obviously, there's a lot of 3 and 4 and more unit buildings where you have different levels for single-family residents on each level. And so they actually only allow you to do one of those. If you own a building that has 4 units in it, you can only do one of the 4, for example. And so, again, Boston must be primary residence and obtain your license. There's fines per day. Seattle, same thing. Although they give you, must register as a business in your primary residence, but you have the ability to do one additional property. And so there's no surprise that there's this common theme going on. I mentioned earlier that Airbnb, when it comes down to it, if there's any ruffling or any noise about short-term rentals being banned. And that's kind of how it started in Atlanta, actually. For those of you that are familiar, Atlanta started out with an outright ban on short-term rentals. And this occurred and kind of got voted in, eventually got voted in as an ordinance, a short-term rental ordinance back in March of 2021. But again, the common theme here, it all got started from a unruly host in Buckhead that had mansions on the same street, 2 or 3 mansions on the same street. It happened to also be occupied by a neighboring resident that was a city council member. And so this particular host would throw these wall parties, loud music, a lot of people coming in and out of the neighborhood, disregarding, parking everywhere, trash everywhere. And so that city council member basically proposed at one of their planning meetings to outright ban short-term rentals in the city of Atlanta. And so as that occurred, Airbnb and their lobbying team basically came together and started developing what they call kind of model legislation, which, if no mistake, the reason why we have this common theme of primary residency is because that's kind of what Airbnb pushes. I'd say probably statistically, there's about 50 to 60% of the Airbnb listings in Atlanta at the time that all this occurred that are individual single listings by individual owners. And so from Airbnb's perspective, they look at it as, well, rather than have an outright ban, let's try to do a compromise and basically allow a primary residency requirement plus 1 property. Now, that is something that has been pushed and pushed and pushed from back in 2021 when this first got voted in. It was supposed to get implemented in 2022 in the beginning, and it's been the enforcement period has been delayed several times, and that is actually part to do with a nonprofit that we formed here in Atlanta called AMSTRA, the Atlanta Metro Short-Term Rental Alliance. And I'm going to touch on kind of where we're at with that and kind of give you guys an update on Atlanta here shortly. And so, again, Atlanta's kind of gone that same theme. The enforcement period has actually been extended through September 2024 now, 2023, sorry, next month. And so we're in the process of negotiating with them on kind of the rewrite of the rules. One of the things, again, to be aware of, anytime that there's any new legislation with your city or your county, Airbnb does try or attempt to do a good job of keeping track of that stuff. So when you set up your listing on Airbnb, you're basically going to be prompted towards the bottom here where it says local laws. And so you'll have a link to where your city and location is, if it's been updated on the Airbnb platform, and it'll walk you through what the requirements are. If you have to apply for a license, it'll also walk you through what the tax requirements are. And more importantly, in most major cities, when the ordinance is passed and in place, Airbnb will actually engage with those local governments, whether it's a city or a county, and they'll arrange to collect those taxes off of each reservation. So this is just an example of a reservation, and under the property use taxes, the $336, I know it's kind of small, but each of your payouts on your reservation will have an item collected for, obviously, the Airbnb fee at 3%, but then you also have your taxes that are due. And so Airbnb works out agreements with each local government, and they'll collect those taxes and pay those either on a monthly or quarterly basis directly to that jurisdiction. And so that is one benefit. Now, if you're on another platform like VRBO or some of the others, or if you get direct bookings, then you're going to be on your own to keep track of that and file for those taxes. Most of us that are doing short-term rentals, no matter what you do, 70% of your revenue is going to come from Airbnb, And so it's a good thing that a lot of the taxes are kind of tracked in that method. Now, part of what's been going on in Atlanta and some of the major changes that have occurred are in a big part due to what occurred about a year ago in New Orleans. And so New Orleans had a similar primary residency component requirement, basically that the Fifth Circuit courts ruled unconstitutional. And so they essentially said you should, based on your property rights as a citizen, you should not be required to have a primary residence in the city of New Orleans to be able to have a short-term rental. And so they basically ruled that out. And so essentially that change got made in New Orleans. Now, obviously, Atlanta and some of these other locations are not in the Fifth Circuit. However, they kind of saw what occurred there in that Court of Appeals and basically have made some changes before they finalized the short-term rental ordinance in Atlanta. Another win, so to speak, was in Wilmington, North Carolina. They had basically a ruling that deemed it not acceptable to charge certain fees for short-term rental during the registration process. And so they had to end up reimbursing all those registration fees to the short-term rentals with interest that were collected from their prior ordinance. And so there are some, albeit few wins that are occurring here that kind of give us some hope in terms of making the argument for property rights and our ability to navigate and be able to have the option to do short-term rentals on our properties. As I mentioned, I formed Atlanta Metro Short-Term Rental Alliance with some of the other professional short-term rental hosts here in Atlanta. We formed a board, and we did this right around the time that they were making the enforcement being required about a year and a half ago in the city of Atlanta. We raised some funds amongst that nonprofit group, and we basically raised enough money to build up a legal war chest and hire an attorney and a lobbying firm. And so that's really what's been able to get us a seat at the table at Atlanta to be able to work through some of these details on the final ordinance. And so we definitely are optimistic that with our lobbying efforts that we're going to be successful with that. And so one of the things I wanted to share with everybody today that's an excellent resource is a website called Rent Responsibly. And so no matter where you are in the United States, this is a resource that basically helps with when these things are occurring, whether or not they've already occurred, to navigate what the rules are in your city or your county, but also to help with the ability to fight some of the legislative stuff that comes up. And so there's basically a map that allows you to see all these local alliances, very similar to the Atlanta Metro Short-Term Rental Alliance. And you can kind of visit their website and be able to, look at some of their resources. For example, we've actually done a recent meeting that we're going to be doing in Atlanta. And so a lot of these local entities provide that option for you as an alliance. And so when you go to their website, there is a map directory, essentially, that you're able to kind of search based on your area for that resource. And so, you've got quite a few up here in Colorado, Texas. These are the names of the alliances. These are their websites, so you can go directly to their website and be able to get that assistance. You also have the ability to see usually on their website. Let's see, some of these are blocked, but you should be able to see kind of what the current regulations are. It allows you to join their Facebook group. and it kind of gives you what the requirements are for that area. And so as you're doing your research to kind of determine, what area you would like to start in, and be able to do so. Here's we've got the Atlanta, our association on here as well, AMSTRA. And so you want to be able to do that, and be able to know, and be able to, do that research, and be able to see, what's going on for that area. Let's see, it looks like I'm going to change the screen a little bit so you guys can see a little bit better what we're looking at. Let's see. In the meantime, please feel free to put any questions in the comment chat section, and we will be happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. Let's see here. So feel free to put your questions out there. This is basically not letting me share my screen with. All right, let's do it this way. All right, so I wanted to make sure you guys could see as I was changing the screen. Yeah, okay, so now you can see it. Perfect. So the great thing about Rent Responsibly is, you've got this map to kind of see what those local alliances are. You can kind of click on it, go directly to their website. You can join their Facebook group. You can get detailed information about what the requirements are for the ordinance. They also give you basically any recent regulations. So on this part of the website under regulations, they will give you basically more details around what's required in each of those locations. And so it looks like Colorado had some recent changes as well. And so, once you get in there and subscribe, you can basically get access to all those details around what those requirements are for the ordinance. So I haven't really touched on this, but there are some jurisdictions that are definitely, so here's some of the details. Like this is Hawaii, for example. There were some changes in Hawaii regarding how the rules work. Unfortunately, I think it does have the house. You have to actually physically be in the house requirement. But it gives you all those details here that you can kind of check into. You can join those local associations as well. And it becomes a good resource for you. Here's, Atlanta. And so here's the Atlanta website for AMSTRA. And so here's our board of directors, myself, president, Kathy McClure is the vice president, Michael Harvey is the treasurer. And then we have all of our board members that all of them pretty much have a large number of listings in the state of Atlanta. And so, we all have vested interests in making sure that we can be successful with what happens there. And so, basically, this website will give you access to those resources. They will also provide you with different reports like statistics, sustainability reports. We were able to get a grant and do a actual report specifically for the city of Atlanta that did an economic study that showed the positive impact of what's going on, with the benefit of using short-term rentals in the city of Atlanta, the impact on the local economy. Obviously, the film industry is big here as well, and so we were able to kind of show those benefits to that. And so I do see a few questions coming in. So let me see if I can get to those questions before we close it out. I did want to also show you guys. So this is the Atlanta AMSTRA website. We do have an in-person meeting coming up in Atlanta on September 19th. And we will be giving a detailed update of what's going on for AMSTRA members. Even if you don't have properties yet, you can join. It's a very low number per year, as probably around $100 to join. A lot of these nonprofit associations aren't that expensive, but they give you a lot of access to information. And so feel free to go to Rent Responsibly. Make sure that you're able to understand what the rules and regulations are before you start investing in those local markets. And so let me take a look at some of the questions here. Are the rules for Atlanta applying for all of Georgia or just Atlanta? Do I check with my county? I have an Airbnb in Uvalde, Georgia, an hour from Macon, 45 minutes from Valdosta. Yeah, so that's a great question. And most of the time, what tends to happen is, we have, to answer specifically the question, the city of Atlanta, new rules that are coming up are specific to the city limits of Atlanta. And so there's a very, drawn, it's actually inside the perimeter, much closer inside the perimeter. But the new rules that they are going to roll out with the new enforcement date are going to be specifically only for the city limits of Atlanta. And so what I would suggest each of you do, like for this person asking the question, you need to do two things. One, check with your city. If you are in city limits, if your property is located in city limits. And then the second thing is check with the county. And so sometimes you're going to have the county that's going to make short-term rental rules, and sometimes you're going to have the city, and sometimes it may be both. And so typically what you want to do is make sure that you check both of those resources before you make your final decision on what market you want to invest in. And so, the city and the county are basically the ones that are going to typically put those rules in place. And this is another question here. What are the best markets with changing rules? And so that's a great question. So a lot of what happens, a lot of what I've been talking about that happens had been a lot of the negative things, right? And so there are a lot of positive areas. There are some counties that definitely recognize the advantage of having the tax revenue. And so they welcome the opportunity to have short-term rentals be licensed in their county or in their city. And typically they'll have very reasonable requirements, like you might still have to apply for a business license. You would might have to register with the city or the county to let them know who the property manager is of that property if something were to go wrong or if there were any complaints. If you get 3 or more complaints within a 12-month window, your listing would be suspended. And so that's all quite reasonable, and basically also helps to weed out, some of these bad actors we've been talking about. And so in those cases, again, to educate what's going on in each of your markets before you pull the trigger on where you would like to invest or start doing your short-term rentals. It's key to understand what the what areas have good regulations. And so the other thing to kind of obviously be aware of too is you have the ability to navigate in the outskirt areas of where there might be strict regulations. And so a good example of this is in Orlando. Obviously Disney World is in Orlando. They get a lot of international travelers as well as domestic travelers. And there's a lot of hotels there, obviously, including Disney, that accommodate folks that are coming in to visit. And so the ordinance for Orlando is very specific that you're not able to do short-term rentals unless it's your primary residence. And at that, you have to physically. Sorry about that, guys. Looks like I had a little issue with my Wi-Fi, and we got kind of locked up at the moment. Sorry about that delay and the technical difficulty. And so, what I was talking about is being able to navigate in other markets that around any strict regulations, and using Orlando as an example. And so, as a result of that, what's happened is in Kissimmee, which is just next to where Orlando is, there's something like 17,000 listings in Kissimmee that support a lot of the travelers that are coming in to Disney. And so, again, as you're navigating and looking at different markets, basically, that's the best way is you can still operate on the outskirts. And so, I hope all of this has been helpful. Whether you're watching the recording or if you're watching us live, please throw in the comments and let me know if this has been helpful for you. And if you would like to also get some information that we've developed through Amstra and through Rent Responsibly as a document that helps when you're talking to regulators, that outlines a lot of the best practices that I spoke about earlier in a PDF document that you can share with them. If you'd like to get a copy of that, put that in the comments. Just put in regs, R-E-G-S, in the comments, and we'll definitely get that sent over to you guys. And so again, thanks for jumping on with BNB Investing Group. I really appreciate it. Sorry about the technical difficulties. If you are looking to get more information about the BNB Investing Program and how we help investors get started to grow a scalable business, feel free to send me a direct message. Again, We like working with action takers, folks that are ready to move and get multiple units. And so a lot of our students typically get their first 1 or 2 units within the first 90 days, and then are off to the races to grow from there, typically getting 10 to 15 units within the first year or so. So if you would like to get more information about that, send me a direct message, and we'll set up a quick 10-minute call and check in with you. And so thanks again, everybody, for jumping on. If you got on here late, you can also watch the replay, and we look forward to seeing you guys again next week. Thanks, everybody. Take care.